Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you're trying to make sense of the world right now, it feels a bit like you're reading 3 different newspapers at the same time.
Oh, definitely. One's all about high-stakes geopolitical games, right?
Yeah, brinkmanship everywhere. Then the next one is tracking just, crazy financial volatility.
Unprecedented swings sometimes. And the third...
That's the one chronicling this incredible acceleration in science and tech. It's almost dizzying.
And that really is the core conflict today, isn't it? You've got these entrenched, sometimes really old-school political power struggles.
Absolutely. Clashing head-on.
Clashing head-on with challenges that are completely driven by rapid tech changes and environmental instability. It just makes for, a deeply chaotic global picture.
It really does. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We've gathered a whole stack of sources, really diverse stuff.
Yeah, everything from breakthroughs in optical physics, light doing weird things.
And the ethical traps of advanced AI, right through to the nitty-gritty of the U.S. government shutdown and, of course, major global conflicts.
And we're here to try and untangle it, pull out some clarity, give you, our listener, the context, maybe those aha moments you need to actually connect these dots.
Exactly. We want to get past just the headlines.
Right. Synthesize these things that seem separate into something hopefully coherent. It's not just what happened, but, why does it matter? What are the bigger forces shaping, the next decade, really?
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe where the political heat is highest. There's this international award that's turned out to be, less than unifying.
Yes. Let's definitely start there. That seems like a perfect entry point into the tensions.
Okay, let's kick off with the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
It went to María Corina Machado. She's a very, very prominent opposition figure in Venezuela.
Right. And normally, a Nobel Prize gives this sort of immediate global moral authority. But this one, the reactions are just deeply polarized, even venomous in some cases.
Yeah, why is that? What's different here?
Well, because this award, arguably, is less about peace in the sort of abstract sense and maybe more about challenging the legitimacy of the Venezuelan state. It's seen by some as advocating for, outright regime change.
So the Nobel Committee and her supporters globally, they obviously praised it.
Oh, absolutely. They framed it as, crucial recognition for her fight, her relentless fight for democratic rights, her call for a peaceful transition away from authoritarianism under President Nicolas Maduro.
They see her as this symbol of resistance, especially with the severe humanitarian crisis there.
Exactly. But the Venezuelan government and its allies, they see this completely differently. It's like external validation for someone trying to destabilize the country from within.
A very different perspective indeed.
Precisely. So the critics are flat out labeling this Nobel Award as an endorsement of foreign-supported regime change. That's a really loaded accusation, obviously.
And it gets more complicated, right, when you look at Machado's own actions and statements.
It does. I mean, for instance, she has publicly supported U.S. military measures, specifically measures aimed at Venezuelan drug cartels. That kind of blurs the line, doesn't it, between political opposition and maybe aligning with foreign military options.
And speaking of alignment, she made that very public, direct appeal to U.S. President Donald Trump for help, right? Hoping for some kind of leverage, a show of force, maybe?
Yes, exactly. And that has really shaped the U.S. approach under the current administration. There's clear frustration over Maduro holding on to power and what the Trump administration sees as the regime's deep involvement in illicit activities. It led to a very hard line.
Like cutting off diplomatic channels.
Pretty much. The administration ordered a halt to almost all diplomatic outreach to Venezuela.
And wasn't there something about designating a cartel? The Cartel de los Soles.
Yes, that's directly tied in. The administration designated Maduro and several high-ranking Venezuelan officials as leaders of this Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, and they officially classified it as a terrorist organization.
Which isn't just symbolic, I imagine.
Not at all. That designation gave them the pretext, the justification, for a really dramatic shift towards a bigger military presence in the Caribbean. We saw U.S. warships, troops deployed, all under the banner of anti-drug operations.
And there were reports of actual lethal strikes, too, against suspected traffickers.
Yes, reports confirmed lethal strikes against suspected trafficking vessels, so it went beyond just presence.
And of course, Russia jumps right in on this with a totally different take.
Naturally. Moscow seized on it immediately. Russia's ambassador to the UN, Vasilina Benzia, gave this fierce counter-narrative. He basically dismissed the whole U.S. anti-drug operation as, I think his words were like a Hollywood blockbuster plot.
A flimsy cover story, in their view.
Exactly, a facade for a planned coup attempt. Nebenzia went to the UN, condemned the military actions, called them a blatant violation of international law, a direct threat to peace in the region.
What's the core of their argument against the drug trafficking justification?
Well, crucially, they point out that the UN Office on Drugs and Crime itself does not consider Venezuela a primary significant drug trafficking hub. So they argue the U.S. motivation must be purely political, not genuinely about narcotics.
So, okay, you've got the U.S. boosting its military presence, framing it as counterterrorism, anti-drugs, Russia accusing the U.S. of plotting regime change, and the Venezuelan opposition leader thanking President Trump for, quote, efforts toward peace and democracy.
It's a perfect storm, isn't it? A textbook case of modern, really high-stakes geopolitical triangulation. Everyone's playing multiple angles.
And these kinds of strategic tensions, they're not just in the Caribbean, are they? If we look north, the Arctic seems to be heating up too, strategically speaking.
Oh, absolutely. Very similar dynamics, high-value military posturing. But yeah, the focus shifts north to the Arctic. It's rapidly becoming, the next big strategic flashpoint. Let's talk about Denmark.
Denmark just announced a massive, $8.5 billion investment in its military. That sounds huge for a country their size.
It's colossal. And a big chunk of that, a really substantial portion, is specifically earmarked for Arctic defense.
So what does that entail?
Well, the commitment includes about $4.26 billion just for strengthening their position up in the Arctic. And alongside that, they're buying 16 new F-35 fighter jets. This isn't just, routine budget stuff.
Yeah.
It's sending a very powerful strategic message.
A message to who, though? Russia, the U.S., both.
Well, sources suggest it's probably dual purpose, but maybe primarily aimed at the U.S., actually, and President Trump. Denmark really wants to show it's a reliable, strong NATO partner, especially with tensions rising in the Arctic.
Is climate change opening things up?
Exactly. New shipping lanes are opening. There's access to potentially huge natural resources. The region's becoming critical. So by making this massive investment, Denmark is saying, look, we're serious. We're an indispensable player here. And not incidentally, they're also hitting those NATO defense spending targets.
Right, showing they're pulling their weight.
Yeah.
But while Denmark is doubling down on NATO alignment, there seem to be some pretty big cracks forming elsewhere in the alliance. Thinking about Turkey.
Yes, this is potentially a massive geopolitical shift for the whole Eurasian landmass. Devlet Bahçeli, he's the very influential leader of Turkey's nationalist movement party, the MHP.
Right, allied with Erdogan.
Exactly. He publicly proposed a full-on strategic alliance with Russia and China.
Wow, okay. That's significant for a NATO member.
It's huge. And it's not just a random comment. It seems to reflect this deep disillusionment with the West. There's a feeling, apparently, that Western powers, especially within NATO, have consistently sort of held Turkey back, obstructed its ambitions for, full national independence and regional leadership.
So the idea is to pivot away from the traditional NATO-Euro-Atlantic ties towards more strategic autonomy in Eurasia.
That seems to be the goal, yeah. An ideological transformation, really, for a country that's been in NATO for decades. It signals Ankara's ambition to be a truly central player in a multipolar world, a world where they don't have to answer to Brussels or Washington.
But this push for autonomy is happening while there's still real immediate tension with NATO itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's happening right now. Just recently, the UK, the US, and other NATO forces conducted this very visible 12-hour joint surveillance patrol right near the Russian border.
And that was explicitly framed as a response to Russian actions, wasn't it? Their hybrid war stuff.
Yes, exactly. Things like the increase in hybrid tactics and these repeated drone incursions into the airspace of NATO members like Poland, Romania, Estonia.
So NATO is actively pushing back.
Right. The UK Defense Minister, John Healey, said publicly the mission was about boosting intelligence, operational awareness, making a clear statement of collective resolve. And of course, the thing driving all this military anxiety is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Russia's actions there are still just devastating.
Yeah, reports from Ukraine. It sounds like the situation is getting worse as winter approaches. Russia seems to be intensifying strikes, deliberately hitting energy infrastructure.
It's a brutal strategy. We've seen these widespread power cuts, over 1 million households affected temporarily, especially around Kyiv. And just tragically, a 7-year-old child was killed in one of these strikes.
Awful. And President Zelensky called them cynical and calculated.
He did, and pointed out that Russia seems to be actively using bad weather, like storms and fog, to help their drones slip past Ukraine's air defenses. Companies like DTEK, the big energy provider, they're in this desperate race against time and the weather to fix things.
Just relentless pressure. But amidst all that awful institutional conflict, there was this one kind of rare, high-profile moment of humanitarian diplomacy, something involving Melania Trump.
Yeah, it's quite an extraordinary story, actually. A real example of personal engagement managing to bypass all the official state deadlock. Former U.S. First Lady Melania Trump apparently successfully facilitated the return of 8 Ukrainian children, kids who had been abducted by Russia.
How did that even happen, given the state of relations?
It seems it was done through direct back-channel communication. It started with a letter that was passed to Russian President Vladimir Putin after a summit up in Alaska.
Wow. That's a major diplomatic end run around the official channels.
It really is, and it highlights something important, I think. While formal peace talks are completely stalled and, state mechanisms are actually escalating the conflict, sometimes personal, sustained humanitarian effort can still get tangible results. Real human results.
So 7 children went back to Ukraine, but 1 girl went back to Russia.
That's right. It's fascinating because official state diplomacy is so rigid, right? It's constrained by mandates, public positions, all that. But a personal initiative like this, especially backed by someone high profile, it operates outside that framework. It achieved this localized success that the formal channels just couldn't seem to manage.
That contrast, institutional paralysis versus individual impact, it does seem to be a recurring theme, doesn't it?
It really does, and that contrast brings us quite neatly, actually, to the U.S. domestic scene, where we're seeing a different kind of paralysis, a self-inflicted one, the ongoing government shutdown.
Right, the U.S. government shutdown. When the government basically grinds to a halt like this, the real-world impacts start hitting pretty fast and hard, don't they?
They really do. The shutdown, it's now into its 2nd week, I believe, and it's definitely moved past just being an inconvenience. It's causing tangible disruption. The White House even confirmed that substantial layoffs of federal workers have started.
Substantial. Do we know numbers?
Initial reports mentioned over 4,000 workers had already gotten notices, and that's likely just the beginning.
And then there's the impact on the military, which sounds like something genuinely unprecedented, a historic first.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. Military personnel are actually set to miss their scheduled paychecks, specifically the one due mid-month.
Wow, that must raise tensions incredibly high. Not just for the troops, but their families, the communities around bases.
Absolutely. President Trump did respond, though. He ordered the Pentagon to use basically any available discretionary funds they could find to make sure the troops get their paychecks, trying to kind of patch over this historic disruption.
But even if they manage to keep the troop pay flowing somehow, the wider economic fallout is still happening, right?
Yeah.
Just the paralysis itself has effects.
Oh, definitely. Especially on financial markets. One key thing is the delay in releasing crucial economic data.
Like from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Exactly. The BLS has had to halt the release of key indicators, things like the monthly jobs numbers, inflation figures.
Why does that matter so much to the markets?
Well, financial markets, traders, analysts, big funds, they rely heavily on that fresh, official, unbiased data to make decisions about where to put money. When that information pipeline just suddenly dries up,
It creates uncertainty.
exactly, massive uncertainty. It messes up their predictive models, their forecasts, and inevitably it just adds to the overall market jitters, sours consumer sentiment. The market hates uncertainty more than almost anything.
And that domestic uncertainty is piling on top of this massive global trade fight that just flared up again really dramatically. Wall Street seemed to react instantly.
Oh, it was visceral. Immediate panic, really. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped, 700 to 900 points? And the S&P 500 had its worst single-day drop since April.
That kind of spasm tells you the perceived risk is huge.
Severe and systemic, yeah.
And the trigger was President Trump threatening another massive tariff on China.
Yes. An additional 100% tariff on all Chinese goods, effective November 1st, or maybe even sooner, he said.
100%. Wow, where is this coming from now? What's the specific trigger?
The core conflict seems to be boiling over China's control of rare earth elements.
Right, those critical minerals.
Critical is an understatement. They're not just any materials. They are vital, basically irreplaceable components for almost all advanced technology. Everything from your smartphone to, well, F-35 fighter jets.
And China dominates the supply.
Totally dominates the global supply chain. So controlling the export of these elements is an incredibly powerful weapon. Geopolitically, potentially catastrophic. The president clearly sees their export restrictions as a form of economic warfare.
And the threat wasn't just tariffs, right? It involved diplomacy, too.
Absolutely. The president also threatened to cancel his upcoming meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. That was scheduled for the APEC summit, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum.
So basically tearing up any recent truce and going back to full confrontation on trade.
That's what it looks like. Undoing any tentative progress, guaranteeing more market volatility ahead. It's a major escalation.
And if we look beneath the surface of the big market indices into this sort of plumbing of the financial system, there are other vulnerabilities showing up, particularly in private credit.
Yeah, this is where things get really complex and frankly a bit scary. There was the recent bankruptcy of First Brands. They're a big automotive component maker. And when they went bankrupt, apparently billions of dollars just sort of vanished from the financial markets almost overnight. It seems to have hit the private credit sector really hard.
What is private credit exactly?
It's basically lending that happens outside the traditional banking system, often involves less regulation, the deals are more opaque, the structures are complex.
So why did billions just disappear when First Brands failed?
Well, when a major borrower like that collapses, the debt they owe suddenly becomes worth very little or nothing. And because these private credit funds often use a lot of leverage, borrowed money, and aren't always transparent about the actual quality of the loans they hold.
One failure can spread. Contagion risk.
Precisely. A single collapse can trigger immediate panic across that whole lending ecosystem. We saw Morgan Stanley, for instance, react immediately by trying to pull cash out of a fund run by Jefferies called Point Bonita.
Why that fund specifically?
It suggests they were extremely worried that the First Brands collapse could spread to other auto parts suppliers or maybe other highly leveraged private deals held in that fund. It just highlights how fragile parts of this system might be, how susceptible to sudden, dramatic shocks.
Okay, so from regulated markets and this shadowy private credit world, let's turn to something else entirely. Prediction markets. These platforms like Kalshi, Polymarket, they seem to be getting huge.
They really are gaining traction. People are basically placing bets, wagering on political outcomes, elections, legislative decisions, that sort of thing.
It's not entirely new, is it? People have always bet on politics.
No, the history goes back centuries. But these modern platforms use technology to scale it up massively. And supporters argue they're actually valuable forecasting tools.
How so?
They argue these markets often distill public sentiment, predict political trends, maybe even more accurately than traditional polls. They represent this unique, sort of decentralized view of what people really think is going to happen because they're putting money on it.
But there's a big ethical debate around this, too.
Oh, definitely. A loud one. Critics argue that basically gamifying political results, turning elections or policy decisions into just another commodity to bet on, fosters this deep cynicism about the whole process.
Yeah, does it sort of undermine the idea of democracy, turn participation into just financial opportunism?
That's the core worry. Does speculating on outcomes subtly change how people perceive democracy itself? If you can bet on, say, a piece of legislation failing, are you then incentivized by the potential payout rather than, the civic duty of trying to make government work?
It's a valid question.
It is, and yet you see the rapid investment flowing into these platforms. The user base is growing. It suggests this kind of gamified financial speculation is quickly becoming embedded in the political landscape, whether we like it or not.
All right, let's pivot now. Let's move into the realm that, well, often seems to offer transformative solutions, sometimes regardless of all the political chaos, science and technology.
Yes, a welcome shift sometimes, and we're better to start than protecting our vital infrastructure from, forces beyond Earth, space weather.
Right, there was a big update on predicting solar storms.
A major boost, yeah. A recent study detailed how they can use a coordinated fleet, 4 spacecraft staring at the sun to spot these powerful solar storms much faster. Some scientists call them space tornadoes, which paints a vivid picture.
How much faster?
Up to 40% faster than the older methods.
40%? That sounds like it could make a real difference here on Earth Critical prep time.
Exactly. When a big solar event happens, like a coronal mass ejection, that plasma and radiation travels incredibly fast. And we depend on a stable space environment for almost everything now, don't we?
Satellites, GPS.
Power grids, crucially. A really large storm can induce these currents on Earth that overload transformers, cause massive, long-lasting blackouts. So that 40% faster detection, it translates into vital extra hours, maybe even just minutes, for grid operators to react.
They can proactively shut down vulnerable parts of the grid.
Right, protect billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. It's a huge step for resilience.
And speaking of critical space stuff, SpaceX has another big test coming up.
Yes, the next big leap in reusable rocket tech seems imminent. SpaceX Starship Flight 11. It's scheduled for October 13th.
And this is the huge one, the mega rocket.
That's the one. This test flight is absolutely essential for advancing their reusable rocket technology, which is what fundamentally changes the cost equation for space travel. This Starship vehicle is the key piece for their plans to eventually carry huge amounts of cargo and ultimately people to the moon and Mars.
Okay, let's bring it back down to Earth, maybe.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence. It feels like we're past the maybe stage and into full-scale adoption in the business world.
Oh, completely irreversible now, I'd say. We are way past pilot projects. Companies are making enormous strategic bets on AI. Deloitte, for instance, is making this huge firm-wide commitment.
And seeing real results?
Apparently so. Zendesk, the customer service platform, reports its AI agents are now independently resolving up to 80% of customer queries. Think about the labor cost reduction there.
80%, wow.
Yeah. And we're seeing big partnerships forming too, like Anthropic, a major AI lab, partnering with IBM, Databricks integrating powerful AI models directly into its data platform.
And the driver is basically efficiency, cost savings.
Pretty much. Enhanced operational efficiency, automating all those routine tasks, which leads directly to, yes, massive cost reduction. But when that drive for efficiency meets high-end creativity, that's where the ethical challenges really jump out, like with OpenAI's Sora 2 platform.
Yes, Sora 2, the text-to-video generator. It looks incredible.
It is revolutionary. It lets users create unbelievably realistic, really stunning video just by typing a description. But the profound ethical dilemma is all about copyright.
How so?
Well, the platform, by default, it's trained on these unimaginably vast data sets. And sometimes, it seems, it includes copyrighted material, images, video styles, maybe even specific characters in the videos it generates, often without explicit permission unless the user actively tries to prevent it.
And didn't people immediately find ways around the safeguards they did put in, like watermarks?
Almost instantly. It's the classic fixer's dilemma, right? As soon as Sora 2 launched with its intended copyright watermark, third-party software popped up specifically designed to remove it.
Undermining the whole point.
Exactly. It just shows how incredibly difficult it is to balance this amazing innovation, creating video on demand, with the fundamental rights of people who created the original stuff. The speed at which tools appear to just instantly bypass ethical guardrails. And it's a huge concern.
But AI isn't all ethical minefields, right? There are really positive uses too, especially for inclusion.
Oh, absolutely. A really great positive story is coming out of India's Purple Fest. It's a festival in Goa focused on disability inclusion.
And AI was showcased there.
Big time. They showed how AI is fundamentally changing assistive technologies for people with disabilities. Things like really sophisticated conversational screen readers, that don't just read text but interact naturally. Adaptive dashboards tailored to individual user needs, real-time captioning services that are getting incredibly accurate. The whole goal is clear. Use AI to democratize learning, boost independence in the workplace, make sure technology actually serves everyone.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, moving from the digital world to the physical, the material world. Some amazing breakthroughs in physics and material science, too. Starting with this concept, optical thermodynamics. What is that?
Yeah, it sounds complex, but the idea from engineers at USC, University of Southern California, is pretty radical for how we handle data. They've developed a new kind of optical system that doesn't need physical switches to route light signals.
No switches. How does it work then?
It uses thermodynamic principles. Basically, the light routes itself autonomously. Think of it like light organizing itself, almost like gas particles spreading out to fill a space evenly, seeking equilibrium.
So the light finds its own most efficient path, rather than being directed by hardware.
Exactly. It bypasses traditional physical or electronic switches, which add delays, complexity, heat. By letting the light effectively choose its own best route, they simplify the hardware enormously and could dramatically speed up optical communications. Think about future data centers handling insane amounts of information.
Mind-bending stuff. Okay, another material breakthrough, closer to home maybe, lighting. This new paper-thin LED technology.
Right. This uses something called quantum dots. They're tiny semiconductor particles, nanoscale, really.
And they make better light.
They allow for a very precise blend of red, yellow, green, and blue light. The result is lighting that mimics natural sunlight much more closely than typical LEDs. And that's a potentially big public health benefit.
Why is mimicking sunlight so important? Is it just aesthetics?
Not just aesthetics. Our bodies evolved under natural light cycles. Traditional LEDs often blast out harsh blue heavy light that contributes significantly to eye strain, fatigue, and it can even mess up our natural sleep cycles, our circadian rhythms. So this quantum dot tech offers a softer, fuller spectrum light. The aim is to reduce that eye strain, which is really crucial given how much time we all spend indoors under artificial lights now.
Makes sense. Okay, one more material thing. This polymer Chinese lantern. What's that about?
This is cool. Engineers at North Carolina State University, NCSU, developed this polymer material. It can rapidly change shape into various stable 3D forms. They mentioned shapes like a spinning top or a lantern, hence the name, just by being compressed or twisted.
Okay, shape-changing material. But what's the innovation?
The really clever part is they embedded a magnetic layer into it.
So you can control it remotely.
Exactly. That magnetic layer allows for remote control. You can trigger rapid, non-contact transformation into these stable 3D shapes.
What are the applications?
Immediate uses are in soft robotics. Think about creating adaptive structures, like robotic grippers that can change their shape on the fly to gently handle delicate or oddly shaped objects. Or maybe dynamic filters that can instantly change how porous they are. Lots of potential.
Fascinating. But before we leave the tech world entirely, it's not all positive adoption and breakthroughs, is it? There seems to be some user backlash brewing, too.
Oh, yeah. Definitely growing consumer dissatisfaction in some areas. A prime example is Amazon's smart displays, like the Echo Show.
What's the problem there?
Users are reporting massive buyer's remorse. They feel the devices have just been completely overrun with advertisements. They've gone from being useful smart home hubs to basically aggressive ad delivery systems.
So the core function gets buried under ads.
That's the complaint. Basic functions are becoming secondary to constant promotional messages, video ads popping up. It's leading to real user frustration, calls for Amazon to rethink its whole smart home strategy. People feel like they bought a product, not an ad billboard.
Yeah, that would be annoying. And one final tech point, more of a security warning. Windows 10 support ending.
Yes, this is a really critical reminder for everyone. Microsoft is officially ending support for Windows 10. If you, or anyone you know, is still running Windows 10.
You need to upgrade. Now.
Absolutely. Upgrade to Windows 11 immediately. Without those regular security updates and patches from Microsoft, Windows 10 machines become incredibly vulnerable, easy targets for the latest cyber threats, malware, ransomware attacks. It's a easily overlooked risk, but potentially a very costly one.
Okay, let's shift our focus again. Moving to some immediate human tragedies and ongoing global instability points. Starting in the U.S., in rural Tennessee, with that devastating industrial explosion.
Yes, just a catastrophic event at the Accurate Energetic Systems plant. It's a military munitions facility in Humphreys County, Tennessee. The explosion itself was apparently massive, heard and felt for miles around.
And the local sheriff described it in stark terms.
He did. Sheriff Mike Davis called it, very somberly, the most devastating incident of his entire career.
Which tells you something about the scale.
And the outcome. The initial search confirmed the worst fears, didn't it?
Tragically, yes. Officials confirmed that no survivors were found among the 18 or 19 people who were reported missing initially. The operation shifted from rescue to recovery.
And it's complex because of the site itself. Exactly. Recovery efforts are being hampered by just how hazardous the site is, dealing with potentially unstable explosives. Because it's a military munitions plant, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, are both heavily involved in the investigation now.
Just awful. Okay, shifting focus globally now to climate-related threats. Mexico seems to be facing a really severe emergency right now with flooding.
Yes, the situation sounds critical across several Mexican states. Heavy rains causing widespread flooding. It's been made worse by the arrival of Tropical Storm Raymond, but it's also being amplified by the ongoing La Niña climate pattern in the Pacific.
La Niña often means wetter conditions in that region, right?
It often does, yeah. And we're seeing the consequences. Confirmed reports of deadly landslides, at least 9 deaths reported just in Puebla state alone. The military has been deployed across states like Chiapas, Guerrero, Oaxaca, involved in massive rescue and relief efforts.
That terrible intersection of extreme weather and human vulnerability. Meanwhile, there's a perhaps quieter but much larger scale humanitarian crisis that just keeps getting worse in Africa's Sahel region.
Yes, the Sahel. That vast region stretching across countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. It's just facing this perfect storm, escalating conflict, chronic hunger, and the really profound destabilizing impacts of climate change all hitting at once.
And the result is mass displacement.
Nearly 4 million people displaced, driven from their homes by violence or drought or both. But what's perhaps most alarming is the global response, or really the lack of it.
You mean the funding?
Exactly. The UN put out a humanitarian appeal for $2.1 billion needed to address this crisis. How much have they received? Just 19%?
19% funded. That's shocking.
It's drastically underfunded. And what that guarantees, unfortunately, is that the crisis will only get deeper. Millions are being left vulnerable to disease, starvation across this huge, incredibly unstable region. It's a tragedy unfolding largely out of the spotlight.
A massive, underreported crisis. Okay, finally in this segment, let's look at Europe, specifically France, where political instability seems almost chronic at this point.
Yeah, it feels like déjà vu sometimes with French politics. President Emmanuel Macron is once again struggling just to keep a functioning government together.
What's the latest development?
Well, he just reappointed Olivier Lecornu as prime minister, which sounds normal, except Lecornu's previous, very short term as PM just ended with his resignation due to backlash over cabinet appointments.
So he resigned and was immediately reappointed.
Pretty much immediately. It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how difficult it is for Macron to find someone who can actually command a stable majority or even just navigate the political minefield right now. And Lecornu faces this immediate, almost impossible challenge.
Good shit.
He's got to deal with really pressing budget issues, get a budget passed, while facing intense hostility in parliament from both the far right and the far left.
And the opposition is calling for.
They're furious. Leaders like Marine Le Pen of the National Rally, figures from the far-left France Unbowed Party, they're demanding Macron dissolve the National Assembly altogether, call new elections.
Why? What's their argument?
They see Macron's maneuvering, reappointing Lecornu like this, as basically an attempt to ram through crucial budget measures without proper parliamentary debate or consent. They're accusing his administration of governing by chaos, by decree almost. This constant cycle of crisis, resignation, reappointment, it just hobbles France's ability to make any kind of long-term policy.
All right, for our final segment, let's explore some of those perhaps quieter but really fundamental aspects of the human condition. We've got some surprising health news, a history rewrite, and moments of accountability. Let's start with health, a really unexpected link found between Alzheimer's and cancer.
This is genuinely remarkable stuff, a potential paradigm shift, really, crossing disciplines. Researchers have discovered that amyloid beta protein, the stuff that forms the toxic plaques in the brains of Alzheimer's patients.
Right, the bad guy in Alzheimer's.
Well, it turns out this bad guy protein might actually have a beneficial role in helping the body fight cancer.
Wait, the protein that clogs the brain helps the immune system. How?
Apparently, the research shows this protein can boost the energy production inside T cells. T cells are those crucial immune cells that hunt down and kill cancer cells.
Okay.
Now, as people age, their T cell function tends to decline. They get less effective, which is one reason cancer risk increases with age. This discovery suggests that maybe, just maybe, the amyloid beta protein is part of the body's attempt to counteract that decline, to give aging T cells an energy boost.
So the implication is we shouldn't just view this protein as purely destructive.
Exactly. It's asking us to reconsider, to see if it might have a functional role, especially in the aging immune system. And the potential therapeutic angle is huge.
Like combination therapies.
Potentially. If we could somehow harness this protein's ability to rejuvenate aging T cells, maybe we could develop treatments that simultaneously target age-related neurodegeneration and boost the immune system's ability to fight cancer, looking for beneficial roles in things we previously only saw as harmful. It's exciting.
Very cool. Okay, also on the health front, we have updates concerning prominent political figures. Former U.S. President Joe Biden.
Yes, an update on his health. Joe Biden, who's 82 now, is reportedly undergoing radiation and hormone therapy. This is for an aggressive form of prostate cancer, which, sadly, is said to have metastasized, spread to his bones.
And this follows his decision earlier this year.
Right, his decision to withdraw from the 2024 presidential election race. His ongoing health situation really underscores the immense pressures of public life and the intense focus on age and health for major political figures.
And in stark contrast, there was a report on President Trump's health.
Yes. Following his recent medical checkup at Walter Reed Medical Center, President Trump's physician reported him to be in exceptional health. Quite a contrast in the news cycle there.
Indeed. Meanwhile, staying with health, but shifting to public health institutions, there seems to be an acknowledgement of some past missteps.
Yes, relating to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, sources noted there's been a public acknowledgement of, well, crucial mistakes made within the Trump administration regarding earlier mass layoffs and staff reductions at the CDC.
And the impact.
These cuts reportedly significantly damaged the agency's core public health capabilities, its ability to respond effectively. And its recovery is apparently still uncertain, especially amidst ongoing budget struggles. It really highlights the potential long-term institutional damage that can come from drastic funding cuts to vital agencies like that.
A cautionary tale about public health infrastructure. Okay, let's shift gears dramatically now, far back in time. An archaeological discovery in China that seems to be rewriting historical assumptions.
Yeah, this is absolutely fascinating. Archaeologists working in Shaanxi province in China, they were excavating a Tang Dynasty tomb, so roughly 7th to 10th century AD.
Okay, and what did they find?
Inside this elite tomb, the remains of a blonde individual.
Blonde. In Tang Dynasty China. That seems unexpected.
Hugely unexpected, monumental, really, because finding the remains of someone clearly non-East Asian, specifically blonde, buried in an elite context like this, it suggests much more extensive and surprising cultural interactions along the ancient Silk Road than maybe previously thought.
So it challenges the idea of ancient China as this monolithic, isolated empire.
Completely. It paints a picture of a much more multicultural society, at least at the elite level, with connections reaching far westward.
Where might this individual have come from?
Well, the speculation points towards Central Asian traders, specifically the Sogdians, who were incredibly important middlemen on the Silk Road. They came from the region of modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The blonde remains, along with other artifacts found in the tomb linking the occupants to Persia and even the Mediterranean. It just underscores how deeply interwoven the Tang Dynasty elite were with global trade and culture, centuries before major European influence arrived.
Amazing. History's never quite settled, is it? Okay, finally, let's touch on a few moments related to justice, accountability, and security. Something happening in Alabama.
Yes, a local justice issue there. In Walker County, Alabama, the Sheriff's Office Chief Deputy Ralph Williams has been indicted.
For what?
Allegedly for providing false or misleading information to the state commission that oversees law enforcement standards. It was regarding the termination of one of his officers.
Ah, so questions about integrity and transparency within the department.
Exactly. It immediately raises those necessary questions about accountability in local law enforcement practices.
And shifting to Europe, a counterterrorism success story, thankfully.
Yes, in Belgium. Authorities there successfully foiled a plot. It was described as jihadist-inspired, and the target was the assassination of Belgium's Prime Minister Bart de Wever.
How are they planning to do it?
Using an explosive-laden drone, a kamikaze drone. 3 young men were arrested in the Antwerp region, remarkably young, actually, born between 2001 and 2007.
So young. And they found drone components.
They did. Investigation uncovered components for this explosive drone, and chillingly, some were found very close to the Prime Minister's own home.
Wow. That really highlights the changing nature of threats, doesn't it? Accessible drone technology being weaponized like that.
It absolutely does. It underscores the immense challenge for law enforcement when facing these kinds of individualized threats using technology that's becoming easier and easier to get hold of.
And one last item, a somber note regarding prison accountability. The death of Ian Watkins.
Yes. Ian Watkins, the former singer of the band Lost Prophets, who was convicted of truly horrific child sex offenses some years ago, he died following an attack in prison.
And arrests were made.
2 men, also inmates, were arrested in connection with his death. It inevitably raises immediate questions, as these cases always do, about prison safety protocols, especially for high-profile inmates convicted of crimes that make them targets within the prison population.
A grim end note there. Well, we have certainly covered a huge amount of ground today.
We really have.
Yeah.
From billions being poured into Arctic military defenses and a global trade war potentially erupting over rare earth minerals.
All the way to quantum dots, creating better sunlight indoors, and archaeologists finding blonde skeletons in ancient China.
Yeah.
It really feels like the world is being pulled in two very different directions simultaneously.
It's the ultimate dichotomy, isn't it? We've talked about politicians fighting over these arguably manufactured crises like government funding standoffs that threaten military paychecks.
Right, things that grab headlines and create conflict.
While at the very same time, often in the background, scientists are quietly unlocking these entirely new frontiers, like potentially fighting cancer, using a protein we only use to associate with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, the pace of scientific transformation, AI, materials, medicine, it feels relentless, genuinely transformative, but it often flies under the radar compared to the daily political drama.
Exactly. Geopolitical brinkmanship, tariff threats, political chaos. That stuff seems manufactured daily. It dominates the headlines, consumes legislative agendas.
So that leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocative one for you, our listener, to consider.
We've spent this time analyzing these colliding forces. If you accept that many political crises are, to some extent, manufactured daily, designed to create conflict, grab attention, devote resources.
While these genuine, often world-changing scientific breakthroughs are happening constantly, almost silently in the background.
Which category, which force do you think will ultimately define our global society's resilience over the next decade? Or perhaps its eventual collapse? Which of these narratives truly deserves our primary sustained focus?
That is definitely the crucial question to mull over as you get back to your day. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.